On the coldest night this city had seen in a decade, a young black woman gave away the last loaf of bread she had left in the world, and unknowingly handed a starving boy the foundation of an empire. 13 years later, that boy came back. He wore a tailored suit and commanded armies. He laid his entire kingdom at her feet, and he asked her to marry him. But she had one condition that no man in his position had ever survived. If you've ever believed that a single act of kindness could change the course of history, stay until the end. Like this video and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The city had been dying since October, and by the time January hammered down, it wasn't dying anymore. It was just dead. Chicago in the deep freeze carried a particular kind of cruelty that people from warmer places never fully understood until the cold got into their bones and stayed there. It wasn't the temperature alone. It was the wind off the lake that came screaming down the corridor between buildings like something with a grudge. It was the way the ice formed in sheets across the sidewalks so that every step became a negotiation between your body and the ground. It was the silence that descended after midnight when even the desperate and the reckless had gone inside, leaving the streets to the streetlights, and the rats and whatever other creatures had no choice but to endure. Zaria Brooks had no choice. She had been inside the bakery since 4 in the morning, which was the only way the math worked. Bread needed time. Dough needed time. The oven needed time to heat because the building's ancient heating system ran on a prayer, and whatever warmth bled through the walls from the restaurant 2 doors down. She'd learned in her first winter running the place that if she didn't start the ovens at 4, the first batch wouldn't be ready until 8, and the handful of morning regulars who kept her lights on wouldn't wait that long. So 4 in the morning, every morning. The bakery was called Brooks and Daughters, which had been her mother's idea and her mother's dream, and after her mother's stroke 4 years ago, had become Zariah's inheritance, whether she wanted it or not. It occupied the ground floor of a narrow 3-story building on the south side of Pilsen, sandwiched between a laundromat that kept inconsistent hours and the restaurant, a Dominican place called Maricela's, whose owner, a broad-shouldered woman named Celia, sometimes brought Zariah rice and beans through the back door when she could tell Zariah hadn't eaten. The bakery's interior was small and exhausted-looking, like everything in the neighborhood that had survived long enough to show its age. The display cases along the front wall were old enough that the glass had developed a slight fog at the bottom corners that no amount of cleaning removed. The tables, 4 of them, mismatched, bought secondhand from a restaurant that went under 3 years ago, sat between the cases and the door like furniture in a waiting room. The walls held framed photographs of the neighborhood going back decades, alongside a chalkboard menu that Zariah updated every morning in her mother's careful handwriting that she had taught herself to imitate because changing it felt like erasing something she wasn't ready to lose. The kitchen in the back was hers alone. That was where she felt most like herself. 4 commercial ovens she'd learned to coax and curse and negotiate with like difficult relatives. Stainless steel prep tables scarred by years of knives and rolling pins. The industrial mixer that had broken down twice and been repaired both times by her neighbor's cousin, a quiet man named Terrence, who accepted payment in cornbread and never complained. Flour in 25-pound bags stacked against the back wall. Butter and eggs in the walk-in cooler that ran cold enough but not too cold, which she'd figured out by trial and error, and one catastrophic batch of croissants she'd rather forget. She knew every inch of this kitchen, the way she knew her own body. Its rhythms and its failures and the specific groan the oven on the far left made when it was about to give her trouble. What she didn't know, standing at the prep table at 11:47 on a Tuesday night finishing the last of the cleanup, was that she had exactly $32.17 in the business account. She knew the number. She just couldn't fully hold it in her mind without the walls starting to close in, so she developed a habit of keeping it at a certain distance, the way you keep a bad diagnosis at arm's length, until you absolutely have to face it. The rent was due in 11 days. $1,400. She had 32. The notice from the landlord, a property management company with a downtown address and a form letter that felt designed to be as impersonal as possible, was folded in the front pocket of her apron because she'd taken it out of the register earlier and then didn't know what to do with it, and putting it in her pocket had felt like doing something, even if it wasn't. The notice used words like delinquent and notice of intention and cure or quit, language that her mother had never needed to learn because her mother had always found a way, had always pulled something out of nothing, had run this bakery for 22 years before the stroke took half her mobility and all of her ability to stand for 8 hours at a stretch. Zariah was 31 years old, and she had been running the bakery for 4 years, and she had never once in those 4 years felt like she fully knew what she was doing. She felt like she was wearing her mother's coat, a coat that almost fit, that she'd grown into in some ways, but not others, with sleeves slightly too long and a weight that she sometimes couldn't tell was the coat itself, or the knowledge that the coat had belonged to someone else first. Her daughter Maya was 6. She was asleep upstairs in the apartment that occupied the second floor of the building, the apartment that had been Zariah's childhood home and her mother's home, and now belonged to both of them. Zariah and Maya, the two remaining Brooks women, in the two-bedroom apartment above the bakery that smelled of flour and old wood and the lavender candles Zariah burned at night when the silence got too heavy. Maya's father had been gone since before Maya was born, not dead, but gone, which was its own particular kind of grief that Zariah had made her peace with in stages and without much sentimentality. He had not been a bad man, just an absent one, and the difference mattered to Zariah even if it didn't change the practical result, which was that she was doing this alone. She untied her apron and draped it over the stool by the prep table and moved through the kitchen toward the front of the bakery to check the display case one more time before she locked up. This was her last ritual of the night, a walk through, a checking of locks, a making sure everything was as it needed to be for morning. She usually did it by feel, by habit, not really seeing the display case so much as confirming it was there. She was almost to the front door when she heard it. Not a knock, exactly. More of a weight against the door. A body leaning rather than knocking, the particular dull thud of someone who didn't have enough energy left to make a proper sound. Zariah stopped. It was nearly midnight. The closed sign had been up since 9. The street beyond the door's small window was empty under the orange wash of the streetlight, and for a moment she thought she'd imagined it, her mind manufacturing sounds the way it did when she'd been awake too long, when the edges of things started going soft. Then it came again. She crossed to the door and looked through the glass. The boy on the other side of the door was maybe 15, maybe younger. It was difficult to tell because his face was drawn tight with cold in a way that aged him and hollowed him at the same time. He was Korean, thin in the way of someone who had been thin for a while and not by choice, wearing a jacket that was completely wrong for Chicago in January. A thin canvas thing, the kind you might wear in fall, now soaked through with rain and probably frozen stiff at the collar. His hair was plastered flat against his forehead. His lips had gone a pale grayish color. His hands were pressed flat against the glass of the door, and he was looking at her not with desperation, but with something quieter than desperation, something past it. The look of a person who has already done the mental work of accepting that the answer will be no and is asking anyway because they have run out of other options. Zariah looked at him for 3 seconds. Then she unlocked the door. The cold that came in with him was immediate and vicious. He stumbled more than stepped through, catching himself on the doorframe, and up close he was worse than he'd looked through the glass. His skin had a grayish undertone beneath the normal brown of his complexion. His teeth were trying not to chatter and losing the battle. He smelled of rain and wet concrete, and something metallic she recognized after a moment as fear, the particular sharp smell of a body that has been running on adrenaline and cold for too long. In his right fist he held coins. She could see them pressing against his palm, a pathetic small collection of silver and copper that he extended toward her with the rigid formality of someone who had been raised to pay for things and was humiliated that this was all he had. "Bread," he said. His English was careful and heavily accented, and clearly something he was doing through significant effort. "Please, I have—" He opened his hand. The coins spilled slightly on his palm. She looked at them without counting them. She didn't need to count them. She looked at the display case. There was one loaf left. A round sourdough she'd made that morning, a little dark on the top because the oven had run hot, which was why it hadn't sold. She'd planned to take it upstairs. It was in the most literal sense the last food available on the premises. Zariah looked at the loaf, looked at the boy, looked at the notice in her apron pocket, which wasn't in her apron pocket anymore because she'd taken the apron off, but she felt it anyway, the weight and the shape of it like a phantom limb. She thought about the $32.17. She thought about Maya asleep upstairs. She thought about her mother, who had run this bakery for 22 years and had never once, as far as Zariah knew, turned away anyone who was hungry. She went behind the display case, took out the loaf, wrapped it in brown paper the way she always wrapped things, folded the edges precisely, the way her mother had shown her, the crease tight at the corners. She put it on the counter. She looked at the coins in the boy's hand. "Keep those," she said. He looked at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't have a word for. "Keep the money," she said again, slower. "The bread is yours." He stood there for a moment that went on long enough to become uncomfortable. Then he set the coins on the counter anyway. He physically couldn't accept a gift without leaving something behind. She could see that in him, some deep point of pride that the cold and the hunger hadn't managed to reach. And he took the loaf with both hands and held it against his chest, the way you hold something you're afraid might disappear. He bowed. Not a small nod. A real bow, deep and deliberate. The kind that meant something in a way she didn't have the cultural vocabulary to fully decode, but understood in her body as significant. Then he pulled a receipt from the stack by the register. She kept them loose there, old receipts, used them for notes. And he wrote on the back of it, quickly, in a handwriting that was neater than she expected from a freezing boy with numb fingers. He pushed the receipt across the counter toward her, and then he took his bread, and he walked back out into the cold before she could say anything else. She stood there for a moment after the door closed, listening to the silence the way you listen after a sound you can't quite identify, trying to figure out what it was. Then she picked up the receipt. He'd written his name, Jun Hae-jin, in block letters, both the Korean characters she couldn't read and the English transliteration. Beneath it, in the same careful handwriting, "I will repay this, every debt I have. I promise on my life." Zariah read it twice. Then she set it on the counter, locked the front door, and went upstairs to sleep. She did not think about the note again for 13 years. The February rent came and went like a debt collector that had learned where you lived. Zariah scraped it together the way she always scraped things together, cashing in a small savings bond her mother had taken out for her in the 90s and largely forgotten about, running a weekend pop-up at the farmer's market 2 neighborhoods over, convincing Celia at Maricella's to let her supply the restaurant's dinner rolls for the month at a rate that was generous enough to feel like charity, and which Zariah accepted because she had no room left for pride. She kept the bakery open. This was, at this point in her life, the primary achievement she organized her sense of self around. Not flourishing, not growing, open. Spring came to Pilsen with its usual tentative quality, crocuses pushing up through the gaps in the sidewalk, the Dominican restaurant hanging its doors open to let the warm air through. Maya turned 7 in March, with a birthday party Zariah threw in the bakery after closing. Paper streamers from the dollar store, a cake Zariah baked herself. 6 of Maya's friends from school crowded around the mismatched tables eating cake and being 7 years old with the particular ferocious joy that 7-year-olds brought to cake. Zariah stood in the kitchen doorway and watched and felt for the length of that afternoon like things might be okay. They were not okay, but they were open, and that had to count for something. The summer of that year was when the neighborhood started changing in ways that were visible if you paid attention, which Zariah did, because paying attention to the neighborhood was how her mother had survived in this location for 2 decades, how she'd known when to extend credit and when to hold back, when a business on the block was about to fail, and when a new family was putting down roots and would become regulars. The neighborhood told you things if you listened. What Zariah heard that summer was money. Not her money. New money. From outside. The kind that announced itself through storefront renovations and new construction, and the particular species of coffee shop that sold individual cups for $6 and had reclaimed wood on the walls. 2 blocks north of the bakery, a building that had been vacant for years was going up. Residential, 12 stories, the kind of building that had a roof deck and a fitness center and a lobby, with exposed concrete and a leasing office that used words like urban and authentic in its promotional materials. The longtime residents of Pilsen understood what this meant. They had watched it happen to neighborhoods nearby. They used the word displacement with a flatness that was its own kind of grief. A word worn smooth by too much use, the feeling behind it still sharp, but the word itself gone dull. Zariah understood it too. And she understood that a bakery running on $32 in January was not going to survive an increase in rent if the building sold to a new owner, which she heard from Celia was a possibility, which Celia had heard from the building owner's nephew who came into the restaurant sometimes. She applied for a small business loan in June and was denied in July. The letter cited her debt-to-income ratio and her business's inconsistent revenue history. The language was not cruel, but it had the effect of cruelty, the way purely administrative language often did. She sat with the denial letter at the kitchen table after Maya was in bed, and she did not cry because she had spent her capacity for crying on the loan process itself. During the 3 weeks of gathering documents and filling out forms and walking into the bank branch on Michigan Avenue, feeling like she was asking for something she didn't deserve, the particular psychic weight of presenting yourself to an institution and waiting for the institution to evaluate your worth, and then receiving its verdict. She was not surprised by the denial. She had not expected anything else. What she felt was a kind of hollowing, an evacuation of whatever had been holding her upright, so that she sat at the kitchen table in the apartment that smelled of flour and lavender, and she looked at the denial letter, and she felt very clearly and very simply that she was tired. Not depressed, not hopeless, just tired. The specific exhaustion of a person who has been running a race they were never sure they could finish, who has been running it for years, who cannot see the finish line and is not even sure there is one. She folded the denial letter and put it with the other documents in the folder she kept under the bed. She made tea. She stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the alley behind the building, the orange light from the restaurant kitchen across the alley, the sound of Celia's staff finishing their dinner service. She thought about her mother, who was in a care facility 20 minutes away, who Zariah visited on Sundays, who sometimes recognized her and sometimes didn't, who in her clearer moments talked about the bakery with a pride that made Zariah feel simultaneously grateful and crushed beneath the weight of it. She thought about the receipt the boy had left. She didn't know why she thought about it. It had been almost 8 months since that January night, and she hadn't thought about it in weeks. But standing at the kitchen window, she found herself thinking about the way he'd bowed, the depth and the sincerity of it. A 15-year-old boy, freezing and humiliated and probably terrified, who had still managed to carry himself with a dignity that she recognized as something genuine and not performed. I will repay this. Every debt I have. I promise on my life. She hadn't kept the receipt. She hadn't thrown it away either. She had a vague memory of putting it somewhere, a drawer maybe, or the folder of miscellaneous papers she kept in the bottom of the filing cabinet. She hadn't looked for it and had no intention of looking for it. She finished her tea and went to bed. The next morning she woke up at 4 and went downstairs and turned on the ovens and started the bread. The years passed the way years do when you're too busy surviving to track them cleanly, not in chapters but in accumulations. Small things adding up until you look back and realize that a significant amount of time has moved through you. Maya grew. She was in the way of children who grow up in small businesses, fluent in the rhythms of the bakery before she was old enough to articulate what she understood. By 8, she could work the register. By 9, she had opinions about the sourdough starter that Zariah took seriously and sometimes incorporated. By 10, she was helping with the simpler prep work on weekend mornings, wearing an apron cut down from one of Zariah's old ones, her hair pulled back under a bandana the way Zariah wore hers. She was also, by 10, asking questions that Zariah didn't fully know how to answer. About money, which children absorb through the texture of their environment, regardless of how carefully adults try to shield them. About the neighborhood, which was visibly changing in ways that even a 10-year-old could read. About why some of the old stores on the block had closed and what those new buildings were. "Are we going to have to move?" Maya asked one evening, sitting at the prep table doing homework while Zariah cleaned the ovens. "No," Zariah said, which was the only answer she could give, though she was not certain it was true. "Mrs. Espinosa's family moved," Maya said. Mrs. Espinosa had been Maya's third-grade teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for 30 years and had been displaced when her building sold. "I know," Zariah said, "and the Hernandez Bakery closed." The Hernandez Bakery was a Mexican panaderia 2 streets over that had been in the same family since the 80s and had closed 8 months ago when their rent tripled. "I know," Zariah said. Maya was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a child processing something large. "Are we like them?" Zariah stopped scrubbing the oven rack. She stood up and looked at her daughter across the kitchen, this girl who had her own jaw and her mother's eyes and who was already, at 10, building the habit of looking at hard things directly that Zariah recognized as a trait worth protecting. "We're fighting," Zariah said. "That's different from being like them." Maya seemed to consider this. Then she went back to her homework, and Zariah went back to the oven, and neither of them said anything else about it that night. But the question stayed with Zariah. It settled into her the way questions from children did, not as something you answered and moved past, but as something you carried, because the child was right to ask it, and you were responsible for whatever answer the real world eventually provided. She fought. That was accurate. She fought for every month, every quarter, every year. She applied for grants she mostly didn't get and programs she sometimes did. The city's Small Business Assistance Office and the Neighborhood Development Organization and a foundation that provided forgivable loans to minority-owned businesses, which gave her $12,000 in her third application year and felt like a reprieve that lasted just long enough to not feel precarious before it ran out. She was 37 years old and she was still here, and the bakery was still open, and Maya was in middle school, and her mother was still alive in the care facility, less frequently lucid, but alive. And Zoraya visited every Sunday, and sometimes her mother recognized her and said her name in the voice she'd had before the stroke, the full warm voice. And those were the moments Zoraya organized her week around. She had not thought about the boy in years. He came in on a Wednesday in October. She noticed him because of the suit. Men in suits came into the bakery occasionally. There was a legal aid office 3 blocks away, and a social services agency that had recently moved into the new building, and sometimes lawyers and social workers came in for coffee and whatever was in the case that morning. But this suit was different from those suits the way a certain kind of car was different from other cars. Not in any single feature you could point to, but in the total impression, the fit that suggested it had been made specifically for this body, the quality of the fabric that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, the small details at the cuffs and collar that communicated a level of expense that Zoraya, who had grown up watching her mother stretch money, had developed a precise sensitivity to. The man wearing it was Korean, somewhere in his mid to late 20s. He was not tall, average height, lean, with a stillness about him that was the opposite of the nervous energy she was used to seeing in men who came in alone. He stood at the counter and looked at the case the way someone looked when they already knew what they wanted, but weren't in a hurry to announce it. "Sourdough," he said when she came to the counter. "The round loaf." His English was accented but fluent, the careful pronunciation of someone who had worked hard at it. "To go?" "Yes." She wrapped it the way she always wrapped bread, brown paper, the precise fold at the corners her mother had taught her. She slid it across the counter and told him the price, and he paid in cash. Exact change, folded bills from a clip that she noticed without meaning to had a significant number of 50s behind the front 20. He took the loaf and left. He came back Friday. Same order. Same suit, or a suit indistinguishable from it in quality if not an exact shade. Same stillness. He paid and left without small talk, which she respected. She had regulars who talked too much and she was constitutionally unsuited to performing warmth she didn't feel, so a customer who wanted bread and nothing else was genuinely easy for her. He came back the following Wednesday and Friday. By the 3rd week, she had stopped noticing the suit and started noticing him, the way he stood, the way his eyes moved around the bakery with a quality that she could only describe as assessment, not suspicious but thorough, like someone who had a professional habit of taking inventory, the way he sometimes glanced at the photographs on the wall. The way, on his 4th or 5th visit, he lingered slightly longer than necessary after receiving his bread, not long enough to be strange, but long enough that she noticed it. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. In the 4th week, he came in on a Monday, which was new, and he ordered coffee as well as bread, and he sat at one of the tables instead of leaving. He had a phone that he looked at occasionally, but mostly he sat and ate, and looked at the street through the front window, and when he left, he nodded at her. Not the small, absent nod of someone acknowledging a server, but a deliberate nod, direct eye contact, the kind that meant something. She found herself that evening trying to place him. She did this with some customers, constructed small private theories about who they were and why they came in. It was a habit she'd inherited from her mother, who had understood her customer base with a sociological precision that Zoraya was still learning to match. This man she couldn't place. He was young, but carried himself like someone older. He was clearly wealthy, but there was nothing performative about it. He didn't want her to notice the suit, which perversely made her notice it more. He came in twice a week and ordered the same thing every time and paid cash and left no trace beyond the payment, no name, no conversation. She did not feel threatened by him. That was worth noting to herself. She had good instincts about danger, had developed them through years of running a business, alone in a neighborhood where the texture of safe and unsafe was something you learned to read, and what she felt from this man was not danger, but something else she couldn't name. The 6th week, he came in on a Wednesday evening, close to closing. The bakery was empty except for the 2 of them. He ordered the usual and paid the usual, and then he stood at the counter and he didn't leave. Zariah waited. She had learned, running a business, that silence was often the most efficient way to find out what someone actually wanted. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket. What he placed on the counter was a piece of paper so old and fragile-looking that she almost asked him to be careful with it. It had been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases had gone soft, and the paper itself had taken on the texture of something worn. He smoothed it flat on the counter and pushed it toward her. It was a receipt from her bakery. Old enough that the register paper had yellowed and the ink had faded to a grayish brown. And on the back, in a handwriting that was neater than you'd expect from someone writing in the cold, she read, Jun Hae-jin. And beneath it, I will repay this, every debt I have, I promise on my life. Zariah's hand went to the counter to steady herself. It was involuntary, the way a reflex was involuntary, her body understanding something before her mind had finished processing it. She looked up at him. He was watching her with an expression that she couldn't read except that it was careful. Prepared. The expression of someone who has rehearsed what comes next many times and is now measuring the distance between what they rehearsed and what's actually happening. The bread was good, he said quietly. I still remember it. She looked back down at the receipt. 13 years. She had thought about him. Not often, not obsessively, but she had thought about him. On January nights when the cold came off the lake and the bakery was empty and she was alone in her kitchen, she had thought about the boy who had left her this note like a promise placed in a drawer. You kept it, she said, every day. She straightened up, looked at him with the full attention she gave to things that deserved it, which was a habit her mother had called her real inheritance. Who are you now? She asked. Not what he did, who he was. The question seemed to cost him something. She watched it move through him, through the stillness, through whatever controlled surface he presented to the world, and reach somewhere deeper. That, he said, is a longer answer than I can give you standing here. Then sit down, Zariah said, and she locked the front door. The closed sign had been up for an hour, and the street outside was quiet under the orange lights, and the two of them sat across from each other at one of the mismatched tables. And Zariah Brooks, who had not cried in front of another person in 3 years, felt her throat go tight as the man who had been a freezing boy with a handful of worthless coins reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a card. No name on the front, just a number. I want to tell you everything, he said, but not tonight. Tonight I only wanted to see if you still remembered. She looked at the card. She looked at the receipt, which was still on the table between them, the old paper carrying its old promise. She looked at him. I remembered, she said. He nodded. That same deliberate nod. He stood and straightened his jacket and looked at her one final time with an expression that was composed but not cold, banked, like something held carefully rather than something that wasn't there. I'll come back, he said. I know you will, Zariah said. She didn't know why she was certain of that, but she was. He walked out into the October night, and she sat at the table alone with the receipt between her hands and the card, and the knowledge that the boy she had fed on the coldest night of a terrible year had become something she could not yet name, something that wore a suit worth more than her monthly revenue and carried a 13-year-old receipt like a scar. She was still sitting there when her phone rang. It was Maya calling from upstairs, asking when she was coming up. 5 minutes, Zariah said. She tucked the receipt and the card into the pocket of her apron. She stood. She turned off the lights in the front of the bakery and went into the kitchen and stood in the dark for a moment, feeling the residual warmth from the ovens, smelling flour and yeast and the specific smell of her own history. The card had no name, just a number. She had not yet let herself think about what that meant. What it meant that the number was a private line, that the card was the kind of card you had made rather than printed, that the man who had given it to her had walked into her bakery 6 weeks in a row and ordered the same thing and waited until precisely the right moment to reveal himself. She had not yet let herself think about his hands, which had been steady on the counter when he smoothed out the receipt. Steady. The way hands were steady when a person had trained themselves past nervousness into a kind of permanent composure, which was not the same as calm, but could pass for it. She went upstairs. Maya was at the kitchen table with her homework and a bowl of cereal and the expression she wore when she'd been waiting longer than she thought was fair. You okay? Maya said. Zariah put the apron on the hook by the door. She stood for a moment with her back to her daughter, touching the pocket where the card and the receipt were. Yeah, she said. Yeah, I'm okay. She turned around and smiled at Maya and went to the refrigerator and started thinking about what to make for dinner. And the whole time her mind was turning over the man in the suit and his careful stillness and the way he'd said, "I wanted to see if you still remembered." And the thing she couldn't stop hearing underneath all of it, the thing that had settled in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, that he had told her nothing, not one real thing about himself or what he'd become. Only that he was coming back. Only that he owed her. And that whatever he owed, whatever a man like that, with a card like that, and a suit like that, and eyes like that, believed he owed a woman who had given him bread on a freezing night 13 years ago, was about to arrive at her door in a form she was not prepared for. He came back on Friday. Zaria knew he would. She'd known it the way she knew when rain was coming before the sky showed any sign of it. Something in the air changed, a pressure shift, a quality of waiting that settled into the bones before the mind caught up. She'd spent Wednesday night and all of Thursday telling herself she wasn't thinking about him, which was a lie she maintained with reasonable discipline until about 2 in the morning. Thursday, when she gave it up and lay on her back in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and let herself think about him properly. What she had was almost nothing. A name, June Hagen, which he'd written on a receipt 13 years ago, and which was apparently not what he went by now. A suit. A card with a number she hadn't called. The receipt itself, which she'd put in the drawer of her nightstand because putting it back in the folder under the bed felt wrong, felt like filing something that didn't belong filed. And the particular quality of his stillness, which she kept returning to, the way he'd sat across from her at the table and looked at her with those banked, careful eyes and told her nothing while making her feel like she was being told everything. She Googled the phone number Thursday evening after Maya went to bed. Nothing. She'd expected nothing and gotten it, which confirmed that the number was what she'd suspected, private, untraceable, the kind of line that existed outside the infrastructure of findable things. She thought about not calling. She thought about calling. She did neither and went to bed. Friday morning, she made bread. This was the cure for most things, or at least the management of most things. The specific physical engagement of the work, the flour, and the water, and the yeast, and the heat. The requirement that your hands do something precise, while your mind ran wherever it needed to run. She made 3 sourdoughs, 2 batches of dinner rolls for Maricella's, a tray of cornbread that she put in the case for the morning rush, and a sweet potato pie that she was testing as a possible addition to the menu. He came in at 11:40, 20 minutes before the lunch hour, when the bakery would get its modest midday surge of neighborhood regulars and the occasional walk-in from the new buildings going up 2 blocks north. Same suit, different color, charcoal today instead of the deep navy of Wednesday, same quality. He ordered the sourdough. She wrapped it. He paid. And then he looked at her across the counter with those careful eyes and said quietly, "Do you have time to talk?" Maya was in school. Celia's nephew was covering the counter for the lunch hour starting at noon. Zaria had approximately 45 minutes. "Come back here," she said, and lifted the counter panel. She took him into the kitchen. She did this deliberately. The kitchen was her territory, the place where she held the most authority, and she wanted that weight on her side of whatever conversation was coming. She pulled a stool from under the prep table and gestured at it, and he sat, and she stood with her back to the prep table and crossed her arms and waited. He held the wrapped loaf in both hands, which struck her as oddly formal, like he didn't know what to do with it now that he had it. "My name is Kang Jaemin," he said. "That's what I'm called now." "Jaemin," she repeated. "June was the name I had when I was no one." He said it without self-pity, as a statement of fact. "I came here when I was 14, not legally." She didn't say anything. "I had nothing. Less than nothing. I spoke maybe 50 words of English. I slept in a laundromat in Chinatown for the first 2 weeks." He paused. "The night I came to your bakery, I had been awake for approximately 36 hours. I had eaten half a granola bar the day before. I was going to pass out on the street. I was completely certain of that." "And then you didn't," Zaria said. "And then I didn't." Something shifted in his expression, not softening, exactly, but a slight loosening of the controlled surface. "You didn't ask me anything. You didn't look at me the way people had been looking at me for weeks. You just—" He stopped. Started again. "The bread was warm. I remember that most. It was warm." Zaria uncrossed her arms. She turned and picked up a dish towel and folded it, because she needed to do something with her hands. "What did you become?" she asked. "After that night." The pause that followed was the kind that contained a significant decision. I found people, he said, Korean community in the city. There are networks, for people who arrive the way I arrived. Some of those networks are legitimate, some aren't. And you went into the ones that weren't. Not immediately. He looked at the loaf in his hands. I was smart. That sounds arrogant, but it's just true. I could see patterns in how organizations ran, where the inefficiencies were, where money was being wasted or misused. It's a particular kind of thinking. I didn't choose it. It was just how my mind worked. He looked up at her. The people who ran the networks saw it. They used it. And then you ran the networks. He held her gaze. Yes. Zarya set the dish towel down. She looked at him. Really looked. The way she looked at things when she was making a decision about them, which was a habit her mother had called her X-ray vision, and which Zarya thought of simply as paying attention. What do you run? She asked. Specifically? Currently? Currently. Another pause. He set the loaf on the edge of the prep table. The Korean syndicate that operates across Chicago, Detroit, and Toronto. I've controlled it for 4 years. Before that, I was second, for 3 years. Before that, I was building the architecture that eventually allowed me to take it. The kitchen was very quiet. The oven on the far left made its familiar low groan, and Zarya barely heard it. How many people? She asked. Directly? 240. The network beyond that, significantly more. What do they do? He didn't look away. Everything that makes money in the dark. She absorbed this. She looked at the man on the stool in her kitchen. The suit, the stillness, the receipt he'd carried for 13 years. And she thought about her mother and the bakery and the notice from the property management company and Maya asking, are we going to have to move in all the ordinary accumulated weight of a life built carefully in difficult circumstances? And she thought about what it meant that this man existed and had come back. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because I owe you the truth. You owe me a loaf of bread. Something crossed his face. Not a smile, not quite, but the ghost of one. I owe you more than that. Don't, she said. Don't make it bigger than it was. I gave you bread because you were hungry. That's the whole story. That's not the whole story. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, the first time she'd seen him break from that perfect posture. That night was the first time in 4 months that anyone had treated me like I was worth something. I was 14 years old and I had been invisible for 4 months. Not poor invisible, not struggling invisible, but actually invisible, like my existence didn't register with anyone who looked at me. And you looked at me. You gave me something real, and He stopped. I built everything after that on the memory of what it felt like to be seen. Zarya stood very still. That's a lot of weight, she said finally, to put on one loaf of bread. Yes, he said. It is. The noon bell on the church 2 blocks away rolled its count and broke the silence between them. And from the front of the bakery, she could hear Celia's nephew coming in through the side door for his shift, the jingle of keys and the stamp of boots. She looked at Jamin for a long moment. Come back Monday, she said. We'll talk more. He picked up the loaf, stood, straightened his jacket with the automatic precision of a man who had done it 10,000 times. Monday, he said. Done. He came back Monday, and Wednesday, and the following Monday. The conversations happened in the kitchen, always in that window between the morning rush and the noon hour, always with the ovens running and the smell of bread in the air. Zarya stood and he sat and they talked with the careful incremental quality of 2 people building something whose nature neither of them had named yet. She learned things. He was 28 years old. He had taught himself English, then business, then law. Enough law to understand contracts and liability and the architecture of how legitimate and illegitimate money moved. He had no family in Chicago, no family anywhere that he spoke to. He slept 4 hours a night as a general practice and had never been able to change this. He ate simply and without much interest in food, which she found both sad and slightly insulting given her profession, and which she told him directly, and which produced the first real laugh she'd heard from him. Short, surprised out of him, like he hadn't expected to laugh and wasn't entirely sure the sound was his. She told him things too. Maya, the bakery, her mother in the care facility, the loan denial, the rent. She told him these things with the flatness she brought to hard facts, without the coating of optimism she sometimes applied for Maya's benefit, and he listened with an attention so total it was almost uncomfortable, like being read, like every word she said was being carefully placed somewhere it would be kept. He never offered to fix anything. She noticed that. Other men, when she told them about the bakery's financial situation, went immediately to fix-it mode. Suggestions, connections, offered loans. He didn't. He just listened. And then, one Wednesday in November, he said, "What would save it, concretely? What's the number? To keep it open through next year? Probably 60,000. To actually stabilize it, put it on real footing, closer to 200. He nodded, like she'd told him the weather. "Don't," she said. He looked at her. "Whatever you're thinking about doing," she said. "Don't." "I haven't offered anything." "You were about to." He was quiet for a moment. "Would it be so wrong? It's my money." "It's dirty money," Zariah said, not cruelly, but clearly. "You said it yourself, everything that makes money in the dark. I'm not putting that in my mother's bakery." Something moved through his expression, not offense, but something more complicated, like her refusal had confirmed something he'd been testing for. "Okay," he said. "Okay? Okay. I won't offer." She looked at him, just like that. "You're not a problem to be solved, Zariah. I know the difference." She held his gaze for a beat. 2. Then she turned back to the oven and checked the bread and didn't say anything else, because there wasn't anything else to say that wouldn't move them into territory. She wasn't ready to enter. The first sign of trouble arrived on a Thursday evening in December, 2 weeks after the Monday Jamin brought a man with him. The man's name was Park Sung-hoon. He was introduced as an associate, which told Zariah nothing, and was clearly designed to tell her nothing. He was older than Jamin by 15 years, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had been damaged somewhere along the way, a scar along the left jaw, a nose that had healed slightly crooked. He wore a coat that cost less than Jamin's suits but was still significantly more expensive than anything in the bakery. He stood by the door while Jamin sat at the counter. He didn't pretend to look at anything else. He looked at Zariah with the direct appraising gaze of someone who had been asked to form an opinion and was forming it. Zariah looked back. "He doesn't have to stand there like that," she said to Jamin. "He's comfortable there." "I didn't ask if he was comfortable. I'm telling you, it makes my kitchen feel like a crime scene." Park Sung-hoon's expression didn't change, but something around his eyes shifted slightly. Amusement, maybe. Tightly controlled. Jamin said something to him in Korean. Park answered in Korean. The exchange was short, and whatever it contained, it ended with Park moving to lean against the wall beside the door, instead of standing in front of it, which was a minimal concession, but a concession. "What does he think of me?" Zariah asked. "He thinks you're a risk." "He's right." Jamin looked at her. "You're not a risk." "You don't know that. You've known me for 6 weeks." She kept her voice level. "A man in your position forming an attachment to someone outside your world. That's exactly the kind of thing that gets people killed in every story like yours. He's doing his job." The word attachment landed in the space between them, and neither of them touched it. "He's here because there have been movements," Jamin said, "in the organization. People who are watching where I go and what I do." Zariah set down the rolling pin she'd been holding. "Watching this bakery? Watching me. This bakery is where I come." He held her gaze with the steady deliberateness she'd come to recognize as his version of emphasis. "I need you to understand that there may be consequences to this, to us talking." "What kind of consequences?" "The kind that depend on how certain people interpret our relationship." "And what is our relationship?" Zariah asked. She said it evenly, a genuine question, not a loaded one. Jamin was quiet for a moment. "What would you like it to be?" "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It isn't." He looked at the prep table, at her hands resting on it, at the flour dusted across her knuckles. "I think about you when I'm not here. I have thought about you for 13 years in the way that you think about a debt you can't pay. And now I'm here and I think about you differently, and I don't know what to do with that because I have never in my adult life not known what to do." Park Sung-hoon was looking at the wall, very deliberately at the wall. Zariah breathed in and out. "You need to go," she said. Jamin stood. "Not forever," she clarified. "But tonight, I need to think." He nodded, buttoned his jacket, looked at her one more time with that carefully banked expression. "I'll come Wednesday," he said. Maybe, she said. He came Wednesday. She was there. Neither of them pretended surprise. The call came on a Monday 3 weeks before Christmas at 7 in the morning when Zariah was in the middle of the second batch of rolls. Her phone lit up on the counter with a number she didn't recognize, different from the card number, different from any number she had for Jamin. And something in the way it looked made her wipe her hands and answer it. The voice on the other end was Korean accented, male, older than Jamin. Mrs. Brooks, it said. We'd like to speak with you about a mutual friend. She kept her voice flat. Who is this? That's not important. What's important is that you understand the nature of the person you've been spending time with. I know who I've been spending time with. Do you? A pause. He hasn't told you everything. Nobody tells anyone everything. He hasn't told you about the people who died building his empire. He hasn't told you about the families who lost... Stop, Zariah said. The voice stopped. If you have something to say to me, she said, say it straight. Don't try to stage it. Another pause. Longer. When the voice came back, it had shed some of its affected quality, become something more direct. He is currently in a very vulnerable position. There are people who would like to remove him from his position. Your visibility, the regularity of his visits to your establishment, gives those people leverage against him and potentially against you. Her hand tightened on the phone. What kind of leverage? The kind that involves people who have nothing to do with the organization being used as pressure points. The voice said it clinically, without relish, which was somehow worse than if it had been said with cruelty. We are not threatening you, Mrs. Brooks. We are informing you. There is a difference. I know the difference, Zariah said. Her voice was completely steady. She was proud of that. And I'm telling you right now, I don't know who you are or what you want from this phone call, but whatever you're hoping I'll do in response to it, you should know that I raised my daughter alone in a failing business for 6 years, and nobody scared me into closing my doors. I'm not going to be scared now. The line was quiet for a moment. Tell Kong Jamin, the voice said, that his window is closing. The call disconnected. Zariah stood in the kitchen with the phone in her hand and the ovens running and the smell of bread in the air and her heart beating at a rate she made herself consciously slow, breathing deliberately the way she'd learned to breathe in the hardest stretches of the hardest years, the controlled exhale that bought her brain enough oxygen to think. She called the number on the card. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he'd been near his phone, which told her something. There was a phone call, she said. This morning. The pause on his end lasted exactly 1 second. What did they say? She told him. All of it, precisely, in the order it happened. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the silence stretched for 3 seconds before he spoke. Are you and Maya... We're fine. I'm not calling because I'm scared. I'm calling because you told me there were movements in the organization, and now I'm getting phone calls. And I think that means the situation has changed, and I deserve to know how. Yes, he said. The situation has changed. Then come tell me. I'll come tonight. Come tonight, she said. He came at 9 after Maya was in bed, with Park Sung-hoon in the car outside and 2 other men she could see from the front window standing at the corner. He sat across from her at the front table, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked tired. Not physically, the composure held, but somewhere beneath it, in the specific way that tiredness showed around a person's eyes when they had been managing something enormous for too long. He put his hands flat on the table. There is a faction within the organization, he said. Men who have been loyal to me and are now loyal to someone else. They have been building their position for approximately 8 months. I have known about them for 6. Why haven't you done anything? Because the way I handle things in the organization, the way I've always handled them, requires precision, timing. I don't act until I know exactly what I'm cutting. He held her gaze. But they have accelerated their timeline. The call you received this morning was not authorized by them. It was a freelance action by someone trying to impress them, but it tells me they're moving faster than I anticipated. Zariah looked at his hands on the table. What does that mean for us? The word sat between them for a moment. It means, Jamin said carefully, that you are now connected to me in the eyes of people who want to damage me. And I have to ask you something, and I need you to hear it as a genuine question and not as anything else. Ask. Do you want me to stop coming here? Zariah looked at him for a long time. She looked at the receipt, which she'd brought down from upstairs, and which was sitting in her apron pocket the way the rent notice had sat in her apron pocket on a January night 13 years ago. She looked at the man who had been a boy and who had built something enormous and terrible in the dark, and who had come back to pay a debt that she'd never asked him to carry. She thought about the phone call, the clinical voice, the families who lost. She thought about Maya asleep upstairs. She looked at Jamin's hands on the table, steady, waiting. "If I say yes," she said, "if I tell you to stop coming here, what happens to you?" He blinked. It was a small thing, the smallest possible thing, but she saw it. "That's not the question you should be asking," he said. "It's the question I'm asking." He looked at the table. "I go back to what I was doing before I came here. I handle the situation with the faction. I continue." "And the person you've been when you're here? The one who laughs at the thing about the food and talks to Maya about her math homework and sits in my kitchen like it's the only place in the city where you can breathe." His jaw tightened, just slightly. "Gone," he said. Zariah reached into her apron pocket and put the receipt on the table between them. "I'm not telling you to stop coming," she said, "but I need you to understand something. Whatever this is, whatever we're building when you sit in my kitchen and I'm standing at my prep table and we talk, it cannot exist alongside what you do. You understand that? I cannot be a person in your life and have your life be what it is. Those two things cannot coexist." He looked at the receipt. "I know," he said. "So what are you going to do about that?" The question landed the way large questions landed. Not with drama, but with weight, a heaviness that settled into the room and changed the quality of the air. Jamin sat with it for a long moment, his hands on the table, the receipt between them, the sound of the city outside and Maya breathing in her sleep above them, and the ovens cooling in the kitchen behind them, ticking as the metal contracted in the cold. When he looked up, something had changed in his face, not softened, shifted, like a piece of architecture that had just been asked to bear a different kind of load and was deciding whether it could hold. "I need to think," he said. "Take the time you need," Zariah said. She picked up the receipt and folded it and put it back in her pocket. She looked at him one more time. "But Jamin," her voice was quiet and completely serious. "Whatever you decide, decide it because it's true. Not because of what I said, not because of what you owe me, because it's true." He stood, buttoned his jacket, looked at her with eyes that she could not fully read except that they were not empty. They were so full that reading them required a fluency she was still developing. "I'll come Friday," he said. She walked him to the door. Through the front window, she could see Park Sung-hoon getting out of the car, and the two men at the corner straightening, and somewhere beyond the orange lights of the street, the city was doing what cities did at 9 o'clock on a winter night, living and dying and moving through its 1,000 ordinary complications. She watched him walk to the car. She didn't know what he was going to decide. She knew, with the certainty she brought to things she understood in her body before her mind caught up, that whatever he decided on Friday would change everything, for both of them, and that there was no version of Friday that looked like what Wednesday had looked like, or the Wednesday before that, or any of the careful incremental Wednesdays that had built this thing between them. She locked the door. She stood in the dark of the bakery for a moment, the closed sign throwing its faint red light across the floor. Then from somewhere close outside, close enough to be just across the street, close enough that she felt it in her chest before she heard it, came the sound of something she recognized only after the fact as the sound was a gunshot. Zariah knew it the way anyone who had grown up in certain parts of certain cities knew it. Not from experience with weapons, but from proximity to consequence. From the particular flat crack that was nothing like the sounds on television, sharper and smaller, and somehow more final than anything a speaker could reproduce. She had heard it 3 times in her life before this moment. Once, when she was 9, in the alley behind her grandmother's building. Once when she was 19, 2 blocks from the community college where she'd been taking night classes. Once the year Maya was born, close enough to the bakery that the windows had shivered in their frames. She knew it. She was already moving before the echo finished, not toward the door, which was the instinct, but away from it, deeper into the bakery, putting the display cases between herself and the front glass. Her hands found the counter, and she crouched behind it, and in the 3 seconds it took her to do this, her mind was running 2 tracks simultaneously. The cold tactical track that said, "Stay down, stay away from glass, wait," And the other track, the one that lived in her chest and not her head, that said Maya. Maya was upstairs. The staircase to the apartment was through the kitchen. The kitchen had a back door that opened onto the alley. Zariah was up and moving before the tactical track could finish its objection. Through the swinging door into the kitchen, not running because running made noise, but moving fast and low, her hand finding the stair door by muscle memory in the dark. She took the stairs 2 at a time. Maya's door was closed. Zariah opened it, and Maya was sitting up in bed with the wide-eyed, not quite awake look of a child who had heard something and hadn't yet classified it. "Come here," Zariah said. Her voice was completely level. She had not known until this moment that she could make her voice that level under these conditions, and she filed it away with the distant part of her mind that was still observing things. What was, "Come here right now, baby," quietly. Maya came. She was 12 years old, and she read the situation in her mother's face, and she didn't ask another question. She got out of bed and came to Zariah's side, and Zariah put her arm around her and took her to the bathroom, which was interior, no windows, and sat her in the tub and said, "Stay here, stay low, don't make noise." And Maya looked at her with those dark, serious eyes and said, "Okay," and meant it. Zariah went back to the top of the stairs and listened. Silence from the street. Then voices, multiple, urgent, in Korean, and one in English that she recognized as Park Sung-hoon's, and then the sound of a car door and an engine and tires on wet pavement. Then her phone buzzed. Jamin's number. She answered it without speaking. "Are you and Maya safe?" His voice was controlled, but the control was working harder than usual. She could hear the effort in it, like hearing the strain in a rope. "Yes. We're inside." "What happened?" "One of the men at the corner was shot. He's alive. Sung-hoon has him." She absorbed this. "Was it meant for you?" A pause. "Yes." "Are you hurt?" "No," she breathed. "Where are you?" "In the car, 2 blocks away." Another pause, shorter. "I'm not coming back tonight. I'm sending someone to watch the building. You won't see them, but they'll be there." "Jamin, I'll call you in the morning." The line went quiet. Not disconnected. She could hear ambient sound, the hum of the car, Sung-hoon's voice in the background saying something fast and low, but quiet, like he was holding the phone and not speaking, like he needed the open line the way you sometimes needed the light on in the next room. She stood at the top of her stairs in the dark bakery building on a December night, and she held the phone against her ear, and she felt the specific cold of understanding something she hadn't let herself understand before this moment. This was not a situation. This was a world. And she was in it now regardless of what she chose, because the choosing had already happened. Somewhere between the second Wednesday and the first laugh, and the moment she'd said, "I'm not telling you to stop coming," the choosing had happened, and the gunshot outside had simply confirmed what was already true. She went and sat with Maya in the bathroom until they both agreed it was okay to move. He came Friday as he said he would, but Friday was different from every other Friday. He came alone. No Park Sung-hoon, no men at the corner. He came in through the back, which she'd told him to do, the alley entrance she used for deliveries, and he looked like a man who had not slept in 2 days, which she suspected was accurate. The composure was intact, but it was running on something other than ease now, on discipline, on the kind of professional self-containment that held because it had been built to hold under pressure, not because things were okay. She put coffee in front of him and stood at the prep table and waited. "Park Sung-hoon is the one who made the call," he said. She went still. "The call to you. The one telling you I hadn't told you everything. The one telling you your visibility gave people leverage." He looked at the coffee without drinking it. "He made that call himself. He is also the one who is building the faction." The kitchen held the words for a moment. "He was with you when you came here," Zariah said. "Yes." "He was standing in this kitchen." "Yes." "He was supposedly protecting you." "Yes." The word came out with a flatness that was its own kind of violence. "He has been with me for 7 years. He was the first person who believed in what I was building, the first person who came over from the previous leadership and gave me full loyalty, or what I believed was full loyalty." He picked up the coffee and set it down again without drinking. "I was wrong." Zariah looked at him. "How long have you known?" "Known completely? Since Thursday morning." "Suspected?" 2 months. He looked up at her. "I didn't tell you because I didn't know how to tell you without telling you everything, and I wasn't ready to tell you everything. You should have told me." Yes. The call came to my phone, Jamin. Someone gave them my number. Someone who knew I was connected to you. She held his gaze. Was it him? Yes. She turned away from him and stood facing the oven. She pressed both hands flat against the stainless steel of the prep table and breathed and organized what she was feeling into something she could use, which was the only thing she knew how to do with feelings that were too large for the space they were in. The man who was shot, she said. He'll live. Because of me. Because they're using me as... Stop. His voice was sharp, the sharpest she'd heard it. That is not... You do not carry that. She turned back around. Who carries it then? He met her eyes, didn't answer. He didn't need to. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm handling it. That's not an answer. That's a deflection, and you know I know the difference. He was quiet for a moment, then... There are people in the organization who are still loyal to me. I'm moving pieces. It takes time, and it has to be done correctly, or it comes apart. And while you're moving pieces, what are we? He looked at her. Because right now, she said, there are men watching my building that I can't see. There are people who have my phone number who I have never met and who may or may not want to use my daughter as leverage against you. And I need to know what we are in that context because I cannot... Her voice broke slightly on the last word, the first crack in the level surface, and she hated it and pressed past it. I cannot be a variable in your equation, Jamin. I will not be that. He stood. And he came around the prep table and stopped about 2 feet from her, close enough that she could see the specific quality of the exhaustion in his face, the particular way a person looked when they had been holding something enormous for too long and were right at the edge of the muscle giving out. You are not a variable, he said quietly. You are the reason I am asking myself whether any of this is worth continuing. She looked at him. Don't say that like it's a compliment. It isn't a compliment, it's the truth. He held her gaze with an intensity that was different from all the careful, controlled attention she'd seen from him before. Raw, less managed, something that had slipped past the composure and didn't seem inclined to go back. I have been in this organization for 13 years, and I have never once asked whether the thing I was building was worth what it cost, because there was no one to ask it for. There was nothing outside of it that made the question possible. He paused. Now there is. Me, Zaria said. You, Maya, this kitchen, the bread, a breath. The fact that you don't look at me the way everyone else looks at me. She held the eye contact and she felt the full weight of it. Not romantically, not in the uncomplicated way of people who had not been through what she had been through, but in the way of a woman who had spent 6 years making impossible decisions alone and who understood what it meant to be seen by someone who looked at you with real attention rather than with need or fear or calculation. I need you to make a decision, she said. A real one, not a tactical adjustment, not a piece you're moving on a board. She kept her voice level and she held his gaze. If you want to be in this, whatever this is, you leave. You leave it completely. You find a way that I won't pretend to understand the mechanics of, and you leave, and you build something different. She paused. Or you go back to what you were, and we end this now, tonight. And I wish you whatever kind of luck applies to what you do. He looked at her for a long time. You're asking me to destroy it, he said. I'm asking you to choose. It's the same thing. I know, Zaria said. The oven on the far left groaned its familiar low note in the silence. Outside the alley was quiet. Somewhere above them, Maya was doing her Saturday homework and listening to music through her headphones. The faint tinny beat of it audible through the ceiling if you were paying attention, which Zaria always was. Jamin looked at the ceiling. Listening, she realized, to the same thing she was listening to. He looked back at her. Give me 90 days, he said. To do what? To dismantle it, properly, in a way that doesn't start a war and doesn't leave loose ends that come back. He said it with the quality of a man describing something technical, because for him it was something technical. The most complicated project of his life stated in the most direct terms available. 90 days. After that, I walk out and I don't go back. Zaria studied him. And Sung Hoon? His jaw tightened. Handled. That word worries me. It should mean, he said carefully, removed from power, isolated, made irrelevant. A pause. I have not, in 7 years of running this organization, ordered anyone killed. That is one line I have not crossed. I need to know it stays uncrossed? It will. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, the way she nodded when she'd made a decision and was done deliberating. 90 days, she said. But Jimin, if at any point Maya is in danger, any point, this ends immediately. I don't care what stage you're at or what it costs you. If Maya is ever in danger, he said, and his voice was completely quiet and completely certain, I will end it myself before you have to ask. She believed him. She didn't know entirely why she believed him, but she did, in the same place she believed things before she could explain them. Go, she said. Do what you have to do. He went. The 90 days did not go as planned. Nothing that complex ever did. The first 30 days were quiet. And the way that pressure built behind closed doors was quiet. The silence of something accumulating rather than the silence of nothing happening. Heyman called every day, sometimes twice, brief calls that were more status reports than conversations. The faction's membership was being identified, financial structures were being examined, the legal architecture that could convert the organization's legitimate holdings into fully clean businesses was being constructed by 3 attorneys who did not know they were working toward the same end. Zarya kept the bakery open. She baked bread. She helped Maya with homework. She visited her mother on Sundays, and on one of those Sundays her mother was lucid enough to look at her with clear eyes and say, "You seem different," in the voice she'd had before the stroke. And Zarya had sat with her for a long time without knowing how to respond to that. She was different. She knew that. Something in the last 2 months had rearranged things inside her. Not broken them, not damaged them, but shifted them the way furniture shifted in a room when you finally moved it to where it actually belonged. The 31st day, everything broke open. She was at the morning prep when her phone rang. Not Jimin's number, not any number she recognized. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. Ms. Brooks. The voice was female, American accented, the clipped, careful diction of someone reading from a script or making a deliberate effort to be precise. My name is Agent Carla Reyes. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We'd like to speak with you about your relationship with Kang Jae-min. The rolling pin in Zarya's hand kept rolling. She watched her own hands continue to work the dough with a detachment she recognized as the body's way of maintaining function when the mind needed a moment. I'm listening, she said. We'd prefer to do this in person, today, if possible. I have a business to run. We understand. We can come to you. She stopped rolling. No, she said. You cannot come here. She thought of Maya leaving for school in 45 minutes. She thought of the men she couldn't see who were watching the building. There's a coffee shop on Halstead, 3 blocks north, 12:30. A pause. We'll be there. There were 2 of them. Reyes, who was mid-30s and compact with the kind of watchful stillness that reminded Zarya uncomfortably of Jaemin's stillness, though it had a completely different texture, and a younger male agent named Kowalski, who had the look of someone on his second field assignment trying not to show it. They had coffee and a folder that Reyes opened on the table and did not show Zarya immediately. How long have you known Kang Jae-min? Reyes asked. You know the answer to that, Zarya said. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. Reyes looked at her with an expression that was professionally neutral, but contained within it, Zarya thought, the faintest trace of respect. 6 weeks. About that. Prior to 6 weeks ago? I met him once, 13 years ago. He was a child. He came into my bakery hungry, and I gave him bread. She held Reyes' gaze. That's all. And now? Now he comes in twice a week and buys sourdough. We talk. About? His past, my bakery, my daughter. She looked at the folder on the table. Are you going to tell me what's in that? Reyes opened it. The photographs came first. Zarya had not been prepared for the photographs. She had understood in the abstract that Jaemin's world contained things she hadn't seen, but understanding in the abstract and looking at evidence of it were different operations conducted by different parts of the brain. She looked at them with the same deliberate control she brought to difficult things, and she didn't let her face do anything she hadn't authorized. Then came the documents. Financial records, some of them. Network diagrams. Names she didn't recognize connected by lines to other names she didn't recognize, and in the center of several of these diagrams connected to everything, a name she did recognize. Kang Jae-min. We have been building this case for 4 years, Reyes said. We are approximately 8 weeks from being in a position to move on it. She paused, and the pause had a weight to it. Your involvement complicates things. My involvement, Zariah said carefully, is buying sourdough. Your involvement, Reyes said, with the same careful tone, is a daily phone contact with the primary target of a federal investigation into organized crime. Your building is under surveillance by at least 2 separate parties, one of which is us. She looked at Zariah directly. We need to know where you stand. I stand in my bakery, Zariah said. I'm not part of this. You may not have a choice about whether you're part of it, Kowalski said, which was the first thing he'd said and which earned him a quick, sideways look from Reyes. What my colleague means, Reyes said, is that when we move, anyone with a documented connection to Kong Jamin will be examined. Your phone records, your financial records, any transactions. I don't have any transactions with him. He buys bread. He pays cash. I understand that, but the documentation of the connection exists, and in an investigation of this scope, everyone in the web gets looked at, even people who gave a kid a loaf of bread 13 years ago. Reyes closed the folder. We're not here to threaten you, Ms. Brooks. We're here because we believe you are a civilian who has gotten close to a dangerous situation without fully understanding the danger, and because we want to know. She paused. Does he know we're coming? Zaria looked at the closed folder on the table. She looked at the coffee she hadn't touched. She looked at Reyes with the full directness she brought to things that deserved it. You're asking me to inform on him, she said. I'm asking if he has information about our investigation. Same question. Reyes held her gaze. Ms. Brooks, this man runs a criminal organization. People have been hurt by what that organization does. Families have. I know, Zariah said. I know what he is. Her voice was quiet and completely steady. I have always known what he is. He told me himself, on day 1. She looked at the folder. Does that surprise you? Reyes's expression shifted slightly. Yes, she said, honestly. It does. He told me because he said he owed me the truth. Zariah sat back in her chair. I'm going to tell you the truth, too, because I think that's the only thing that makes sense right now. I don't know what you have in that folder. I don't know the details of what his organization has done. He has not shared that with me, and I have not asked. She paused. What I know is that 3 days ago I asked him to leave it, to dismantle it and walk away. And he said yes. The silence at the table was sharp and brief. He said yes, Reyes repeated. He gave himself 90 days. Reyes and Kowalski exchanged a look that Zariah couldn't fully read. Ms. Brooks, Reyes said slowly, if what you're saying is accurate, if he is genuinely in the process of dismantling the organization, that changes the calculus of our investigation significantly. It also. She stopped, started again. It also creates an extremely dangerous window, because the people inside the organization who don't want it dismantled will move to stop him, and anyone connected to him during that window is what? Zariah said. Exposed, Reyes said. Zariah sat with the word. Outside the coffee shop window, Halstead Street ran its ordinary December business. People with coats and bags, a bus pulling away from the stop. The particular quality of cold gray Chicago light that turned everything slightly silver. Ordinary. Completely ordinary. She thought about Jamin saying, "Give me 90 days." She thought about the gunshot outside her bakery. She thought about Maya in the bathtub saying okay with her serious 12-year-old eyes. She thought about Park Sung-hoon standing in her kitchen, looking at her like a problem to be assessed. She thought about the receipt in her nightstand drawer. What do you want from me? She asked. Reyes reached into the folder and placed a card on the table. For now? Nothing. We want you to continue exactly as you have been. We want you to be safe, and we want you to have a way to contact us if anything changes. She looked at Zariah. We are not asking you to do anything against him. We are asking you to protect yourself. Zariah picked up the card. She looked at it. She put it in her jacket pocket alongside. She was suddenly aware the number Jamin had given her 6 weeks ago. She walked back to the bakery. She went into the kitchen. She put on her apron. She stood at the prep table and she looked at the ovens and she breathed deliberately, the way she'd learned to breathe in the hardest stretches, the exhale that bought the brain enough oxygen to think. Then she called Jamin. He answered on the first ring. FBI, she said. They came to me this morning. They've been building a case for 4 years. They say they're 8 weeks from moving. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 4 seconds, long enough that she counted them. Are you safe? He said. Yes. Is Maya? She's at school. She's fine. Zariah pressed her free hand flat against the prep table. They're not threatening me. They said they're trying to protect me. But Jamin... She paused. They know. They know you're in the process of something. I told them what you told me. I didn't know if that was right, but I couldn't sit across from them and lie about it. I don't do that. Another silence. Shorter this time. You told them I was dismantling it, he said. Yes. Did they say what they'd do with that? They said it changed the calculus of the investigation. She paused. And that the window you're in is the most dangerous part. That the people inside who don't want it dismantled will move to stop you. She heard him breathe, slow, controlled. The breath of a man doing the things she did, buying the brain enough oxygen to think. Sung-hoon already moved, he said. She went cold. What does that mean? It means the timeline I gave you is no longer accurate. A pause. I need to move faster. The 90 days. I may not have 90 days. How long do you have? I don't know. Weeks? Maybe less. Zariah looked at the ovens, thought about Maya, thought about the FBI agent's card in her pocket, and the number in her other pocket, and the receipt in her nightstand drawer, all the pieces of this thing she had walked into one loaf of bread at a time. Then move, she said. Whatever you need to do, move. But Jamin... Her voice dropped to something very quiet. If this goes wrong, if something happens and you can't finish it, you call me first. You understand? Before anything else, you call me. Nothing is going to happen to you, he said. That's not what I said. She gripped the edge of the table. I said you call me. Promise me that. A long silence. Longer than the others. I promise, he said. She hung up and stood in the kitchen of her mother's bakery with 2 phone numbers in her pocket pointed in opposite directions, and outside the alley was quiet, and above her the ceiling held the ghost of Maya's music, and somewhere in the city a man who had carried a receipt for 13 years was calculating how fast he could burn. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. Zariah was not asleep. She had not been asleep since 11, when she turned off the light and lain in the dark and listened to the buildings settle around her, and Maya breathe through the wall and the city outside, do what the city did at night, which was never fully go quiet. She'd been lying there with her eyes open, running the same calculations she'd been running for 3 days since the coffee shop, trying to find an arrangement of the pieces that didn't end with someone getting hurt, and failing because there wasn't one. The phone lit up the ceiling. Jamin's number. She answered before the second pulse. I need you to listen. His voice was different, still controlled, but the control was doing something different now, not containing composure, but containing urgency, the specific quality of a voice that is disciplined enough not to shake, but is shaking underneath. I need you to take Maya and go to Celia's. Right now. Through the kitchen, through the alley, don't turn on any lights. She was already sitting up. What's happening? Sung-hoon moved tonight. He moved earlier than... There are men outside your building, Zariah, not mine, his. Her feet found the floor. How many? We think 3. The 2 we can confirm are at the front, possibly 1 in the alley. A sound behind his voice, movement, quick exchanges in Korean that she couldn't parse. Go through the alley anyway. There's a man named Kim on the corner of the next block in a gray Hyundai. He will take you wherever you need to go. He's mine. You can trust him. You're sure? He's the only person I'm certain of right now, yes. She was in Maya's room. She put her hand on Maya's shoulder, and Maya woke the way she'd woken since she was a child, not gradually, but all at once, eyes open and present, the deep sleeper's transition into full alertness that had always slightly amazed Zariah. Get your shoes, Zariah said, quiet, level. Your coat. Nothing else. Maya read her face and asked nothing. She got her shoes. Zariah put the phone back to her ear. We're moving. What about you? I'm handling Sung-hoon. Jamin, I will call you when it's done. A pause, and inside the pause was something that was not quite fear, but was its close neighbor. The sound of a man standing at the edge of something and looking down. If I don't call by 6, call Reyes. Don't say that. Zariah. Her name in his mouth, in that voice. Go. She pocketed the phone. She took Maya's hand and they went through the kitchen in the dark. No lights. Zoraya's free hand trailing along the wall she knew by absolute feel, finding the back door, the deadbolt, the alley. The cold outside was brutal and immediate. January had come back with a specificity of cruelty. The temperature below zero, the wind finding every gap in their coats, the alley floor sheeted with ice that Zoraya navigated by instinct and memory, keeping Maya close, moving fast without running. She looked right, clear. She looked left. A figure at the far end of the alley, near the street, standing in a way that was not the way people stood when they were just standing. Too still, too aware. She pulled Maya back against the building wall, and they stood in the shadow of the dumpster, and Zoraya made herself breathe slowly and thought with the cold, precise part of her brain that she was increasingly grateful for. The figure hadn't moved, hadn't looked their way. But he was between them and the street, between them and the gray Hyundai, and there was nothing between them and him except 40 feet of iced-over alley and the dark. She looked at Maya, 12 years old, back against the brick wall, coat half-zipped because there hadn't been time, eyes moving between Zoraya's face and the figure at the alley's end with an expression that was not panic, but was the thing that existed just adjacent to panic, when a person was holding it together through sheer will. "There's a door," Maya whispered. Zarya looked where she was looking. Maricella's. The restaurant's back door, 15 feet to their right, the door Celia's staff used for delivery, and the one Celia herself sometimes held open to wave Zoraya through when she brought the dinner rolls. Zoraya knew that door. She knew it was usually locked from outside after service ended. She also knew that Celia frequently forgot to lock it. She took Maya's hand and they moved along the wall, hugging the brick, staying in the shadow. And when Zoraya reached the restaurant door, she tried the handle with the careful deliberateness of someone for whom the answer mattered more than almost anything had ever mattered. It opened. They went through. The kitchen at Maricella's was dark and warm and smelled of sofrito and clean steel, the particular dense smell of a restaurant kitchen after service. And Zoraya stood inside with Maya against her side and let the door close softly behind them and breathed. She texted Kim's description to Jamin and got back a response in 40 seconds. "Go through front. Kim will come to you." She texted Celia, "I'm in your kitchen. I'm sorry, I'll explain." 3 dots appeared immediately, which meant Celia was awake, which shouldn't have surprised her. Then, "I'll come down." Celia did not ask many questions. This was one of the things Zoraya had always valued about her. She was a woman who had lived enough life to know when questions were the wrong tool. She came down from her apartment above the restaurant in a robe with her reading glasses still on, looked at Zoraya and Maya standing in her dark kitchen, and said, "Okay," with the flatness of a person making an assessment rather than an expression of acceptance. She fed Maya toast and made Zoraya coffee and sat across from her at the kitchen table, while Maya dozed on the restaurant bench in the next room, and she said, "How bad?" "I don't know yet," Zoraya said. "Is it the man in the suit?" Zoraya looked at her. "You knew. Baby, I run a restaurant with windows. I see everything that walks past my building twice a week for 6 weeks. Celia wrapped both hands around her own coffee cup. "I didn't say anything because you didn't say anything. And because he looked at you like—" She stopped. "Like you were the only fixed point in the room. I recognize that look. My husband used to look at me that way before he stopped." She set her cup down. "Are you safe here?" "For now. There's someone coming." Celia nodded. The nod of a woman who had decided to ask no more questions and meant it. Kim arrived at 3:40 in an unremarkable gray car, and Zoraya woke Maya and they got in and Kim drove north without being asked where to go, which meant he'd been told, which meant Jamin had thought this through before the night fell apart. Kim was maybe 30, slight, with the particular focused silence of someone executing a task they'd been specifically prepared for. He did not speak. Zoraya did not try to make him. They drove to a building in Lincoln Park that Zoraya had never seen before, a mid-rise new construction, the kind with a keycard lobby and cameras at the entrance. Kim used a card and took them up to the 14th floor and unlocked an apartment that was furnished but felt unoccupied, the furniture placed with the generic accuracy of something staged rather than lived in. "Stay here," Kim said. "Do not open the door. Mr. Kang will contact you." Then he left. Maya stood in the middle of the living room in her coat and looked around and then looked at her mother. She was 12, and she was tired, and she had been a remarkable person tonight, and Zariah felt something in her chest that was too large to have a clean name. "You can take your coat off," Zariah said. "What's happening, Mom?" "Sit down." They sat on the staged couch, and Zariah told her. Not everything, not the weight of the financial records and the photographs and the network diagrams, but enough. She told her about Jamin and who he was and what he was trying to do and why they were in this apartment at 4 in the morning. She told it plainly, without cushioning, because Maya was 12 and smart and had been asking the right questions for years, and cushioning the truth was a way of saying the person couldn't handle it, which she had never believed about her daughter. Maya listened with her hands in her lap and her face doing the thing it did when she was processing something large, very still, eyes slightly unfocused, internal. When Zariah stopped talking, Maya was quiet for a moment. "He's trying to get out," Maya said. "Yes. Because of you." Zariah paused. "Because he decided to." "Mom." Maya looked at her with the precise expression of a 12-year-old who was done with imprecision. "Is it because of you?" "Partly," Zariah said. "Yes." Maya absorbed this. "Is he going to be okay?" "I don't know." Another pause. "Do you love him?" Zariah looked at her daughter. She thought about the question with the honesty she tried to bring to everything, the refusal to dress things up or down. "I think I might be getting there," she said. Maya looked at the floor. Then she nodded, the small decisive nod she'd had since she was 4, the nod that meant she'd made her assessment and reached her conclusion and was prepared to act on it. "Then we wait," Maya said. They waited. At 5:09 the phone rang. Not Jamin's number. A number she didn't recognize, and in the 3 seconds between seeing it and answering it, she felt her heart do something that was not quite stopping, but was its immediate neighbor. "Ms. Brooks." Reyes. "We need to talk." "How did you get this number?" "We've been tracking Mr. Kang's movements tonight. We know where you are." A pause. "We also know where he is." Zara stood and moved to the window, the dark city below, the lake invisible in the distance. "Where?" "A warehouse in the South Loop. We have eyes on the building." Reyes's voice was careful, the precision of someone choosing each word. "Miss Brooks, what's happening tonight is beyond anything we anticipated in terms of timeline. Sung-hoon moved with a speed that there are approximately 9 men in that warehouse. 6 are Sung-hoon's, 2 are Kang's, and Kang himself." The math was not difficult. Zariah did it in the time it took her to breathe. "Why are you calling me?" she said, "if you have eyes on it?" "Because we're trying to determine whether to move tonight or hold." "What's the difference?" "If we move tonight, we take everyone in that building, including Kang. The case we've built goes forward, and he is part of it." A pause. "If we hold, if whatever is happening in there resolves itself before we move, we have more flexibility. We have the option of considering the value of cooperation from someone who has voluntarily dismantled a criminal organization." Zariah pressed her hand flat against the cold window glass. "You're offering him a deal. I'm saying the option exists. I'm saying it exists specifically because of what you told me 3 days ago, and because we have been watching his movements tonight, and they are consistent with what you described. A man trying to end something, not escalate it." Reyes paused. "I'm calling you because you are the one person in this situation who he will take a call from, and I need him to know that the option exists before he makes decisions in that building that cannot be unmade." The cold from the window glass came through Zariah's palm and into her arm and settled in her chest. "If I call him," she said slowly, "and he's in the middle of something, I know, that's the risk, but the alternative is we move in 20 minutes and the option closes." Zariah turned away from the window. Maya was watching her from the couch with those dark, serious eyes, and Zariah looked at her daughter and thought about every decision she had made in the last 6 weeks and every decision before that. The 4 years of running the bakery alone, and the years before that, and the January night when a boy with a handful of coins had pressed his face against her glass, and she had unlocked the door. She had unlocked the door. Some decisions were made in the moment, and some were made long before the moment arrived. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. She called Jamin. It rang 4 times, each ring a separate small crisis. And then he answered, and the sound behind him was not what she expected. Not violence, not chaos. Silence. A thick, deliberate silence of the kind that existed inside something rather than outside it. Zoraya. His voice was very quiet. Are you hurt? No. Where is Sung Hoon? A pause. In front of me. Is he? He's alive. He's contained. A breath. We are in the middle of something. I know. Reyes called me. She has eyes on the building. She has 20 minutes before she moves in and takes everyone. Zoraya kept her voice steady and direct. She said there's an option, cooperation from someone who has voluntarily dismantled the organization. She said the option is real, but it closes if they come in. The silence that followed was 6 seconds. She counted. She told you to call me, he said. Yes. And you called me? Yes. Another silence, shorter. What do you think I should do? He said. The question landed in her like a stone dropped from a height. He was not asking her to make his decision. He was asking because he trusted her answer above everything else available to him in this moment, and she understood that, and the understanding was its own weight that she held and did not put down. I think, she said slowly, that you have spent 13 years building something in the dark, and I think you have spent the last 6 weeks deciding to come into the light. She gripped the phone. I think the deal is the light. I think fighting your way out of that building is the dark, and I think you already know which one you want. The silence this time was different, not calculating, not strategic, something quieter than that. Sung-hoon won't cooperate, he said. He will fight whatever deal. Sung-hoon is not your problem anymore. You said he was handled. He is. Then let Reyes have him. Let her have all of it. She paused. Walk out of that building, Jimin. Just walk out. She heard him breathe, the slow, controlled breath that was becoming as familiar to her as her own. The organization, he said. The men who are loyal to me. There are people who will be... I know, that's real. But you cannot protect everyone from every consequence of what you built. You can only decide what you do right now, in this moment. Her voice was quieter now. Walk out, call Reyes, take the deal. Silence. If I do this, he said, it's over. Everything I built, I know. I will have nothing. You'll have what you started with, she said, and someone who unlocked the door. The longest silence yet. Then, tell Reyes 20 minutes. Tell her I'll come out the front. Zoraya breathed for the first time in what felt like several minutes. Jimin, I know, he said quietly. I know. She called Reyes. Then she sat down next to Maya on the staged couch in the safe apartment, and Maya leaned against her and they sat in the dark and watched the city outside the window. And waited. And at 5:44 in the morning, Zoraya's phone lit up with a text from a number she didn't recognize that said simply, Out. Front. Reyes has him. She put the phone down. She sat with her hands in her lap and the city going gray outside toward dawn and Maya's weight against her side. She thought about a receipt with a promise written on it in the cold handwriting of a freezing boy. She thought about the moment that morning, 13 years ago, when she'd come downstairs and the receipt was on the counter, and she'd read it and set it down and gone upstairs to sleep, not knowing that the debt it described would take. The dawn came in gray and without ceremony, the way Chicago dawns came in January, not breaking so much as arriving, the darkness thinning by degrees until the sky was the color of old concrete and the city reassembled itself out of the dark one building at a time. Zoraya watched it from the window of the 14th floor apartment while Maya slept on the couch behind her, finally fully under, her breathing the slow, even rhythm of someone whose body had decided enough was enough and taken over. Zoraya had covered her with a throw blanket from the closet, the only personal feeling thing in the whole staged apartment, and stood at the window and watched the city come back and held her phone and waited. At 6:22, Reyes called. He's in custody, Reyes said. Cooperative. Sung-hoon and 4 others were taken at the scene. 2 of Sung-hoon's men are in the hospital. Non-life-threatening. No fatalities. A pause that had a texture to it. A pause that was not empty. Kang gave us everything. Names, structures, financial architecture, the works. He started talking before we got him in the car. Zoraya pressed her forehead lightly against the cold glass. What happens now? Now it's complicated. It's going to be complicated for a while. Reyes said it without softening it, which Zoraya respected. The U.S. Attorney's Office will be involved. His cooperation is significant. Probably the most significant single cooperation we've gotten in this investigation. That matters, but it doesn't make things simple. Does he go to prison? A pause. That's not my determination to make. What I can tell you is that the difference between what happens to someone who cooperates fully and voluntarily versus someone we take down fighting is substantial. His attorneys, and he will have very good attorneys, will make that case. Another pause. He asked about you, first thing. Before he said anything else, he asked if you and your daughter were safe. Zariah closed her eyes for a moment. Tell him yes, she said. I did. She stood at the window for a while after the call ended, watching a garbage truck make its way up the street below with the slow grinding patience of something that had a job to do regardless of what had happened the night before. She thought about the word complicated, which Reyes had used twice and which was, she suspected, the most accurate word available for the next significant portion of her life. She had known that. She had known it from somewhere around the third Wednesday in October when she'd looked across the counter at a man in an expensive suit holding a sourdough loaf with both hands and felt something shift in the architecture of how she understood her own life. She had known it, and she had unlocked the door anyway, which was not stupidity and was not naivety and was not even exactly hope. It was something more stubborn than hope. It was the same thing that got her downstairs at 4 a.m. to turn on the ovens. The same thing that had made her hand a loaf of bread to a freezing boy when she had $32 in the account. The same thing her mother had carried for 22 years in a neighborhood that made carrying it difficult. She didn't have a clean word for it either. She just knew what it felt like from the inside. She went and sat beside Maya and waited for her daughter to wake up. They let her see him on the 4th day. It was a federal holding facility on the west side, a building that announced nothing about itself from the outside, just concrete and windows and the particular institutional flatness of places designed to contain. Reyes had arranged it in a way that made Zariah understand the cooperation had indeed been significant, that the U.S. Attorney's Office was treating Jamin as an asset rather than simply a target, that the complicated thing Reyes had described was complicated in ways that ran in multiple directions. She went through the security process with the patience she brought to all bureaucratic processes, the patience of someone who had spent years navigating forms and offices and systems that were not designed with her convenience in mind. She handed over her phone, her jacket, her bag. She sat in a waiting room with plastic chairs and fluorescent light and a water dispenser in the corner that made a gurgling sound every few minutes like something uncomfortable. Then a guard took her down a hallway and through a door and into a room with a table and 2 chairs and no particular character, and she sat down and waited. He came in looking like himself and not like himself. The suit was gone. He was in the clothes they'd given him, a gray sweatshirt and dark pants that fit approximately and gave no information about the person inside them, the way suits gave information. He was unshaven for the first time she'd ever seen him, 3 or 4 days of growth that changed the geometry of his face slightly. He looked tired in a way that went deeper than the surface. The tiredness of someone who had put down something very heavy and was feeling for the first time the full extent of what carrying it had cost. He sat down across from her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and the room held the silence without asking them to fill it. "You look terrible," she said. Something moved through his face. Not quite a smile, but its antecedent. "I know." "Are you hurt?" "No." He looked at his hands on the table. They were the same steady hands. That hadn't changed. The agents have been professional, Reyes especially. She's good at her job. "Yes." He looked up. "How's Maya?" "At school. Acting like everything is normal, which I think is her way of deciding everything will be normal." Zariah paused. "She asked about you." Something in his face moved more significantly at that. He looked back down at his hands. "What did you tell her?" "That you were dealing with the consequences of decisions you'd made, and that you'd made a decision to deal with them honestly." She watched him. She said, and I'm quoting directly, "At least he didn't run." He was quiet for a moment. "She's right," he said. "I didn't run." "No, you didn't." Zariah leaned forward slightly, arms on the table. "Tell me what they're saying, honestly." He looked up. 18 months, most likely. Could be less, depending on how useful the information is as the case moves forward. My attorneys they're good. Reyes wasn't wrong about the cooperation mattering. He said it with the flatness of someone reporting facts rather than asking for a reaction, which she understood as a form of dignity, refusing to present the information in a frame that required her to respond with reassurance. There will be civil asset proceedings. Most of what I had, what was built through the organization, will be subject to forfeiture. There are some holdings that were cleanly separated years ago, legitimately structured. Those may survive. A pause. I will not be a wealthy man when this is done. Were you planning to stay a wealthy man? He looked at her. No. Then that's not news. He was quiet, studying her face with the thorough attention she'd come to know, reading her the way he'd always read her. Not for weakness or leverage, but for truth, for the actual state of things. Why are you here? He said. Not coldly, genuinely. Because you called me before anything else, the way I asked. I called you because I needed to hear your voice. I know, she said. That's why I'm here. He breathed, the slow, controlled breath. Zariah, I had an organization with 240 people. I had more money than I could have spent in 3 lifetimes. I had influence over things that politicians with actual power couldn't touch. He held her gaze. I gave all of it to a federal agent at 5 in the morning because a woman who runs a bakery in Pilsen told me to walk out the front door. A pause. I need you to understand I don't regret that. I'm telling you the scale of it so you understand what I'm saying when I tell you I don't regret it. Not any of it. Zariah looked at him for a long time. I know, she said. You're not surprised. I've had 4 days to think about it. And? She unfolded her hands and laid them flat on the table, not reaching toward him. The rules of the facility didn't allow contact, which she'd been told in advance, but open, the gesture of someone with nothing held back. And I think, she said slowly, that you have spent your entire adult life being the most dangerous person in every room you entered. And I think that's a very lonely way to live. She paused. And I think that whatever comes after this, the 18 months, the rebuilding, all of it, I think that's the first real life you'll have had, and I'd like to be part of it. She held his gaze. If you want that. The room was very quiet. I want that, he said. His voice was quiet and completely certain, the voice he used for things he'd decided completely. I've wanted that since the second Wednesday. The second Wednesday, she said, specifically. You told me the bread I was ordering was the one that runs hot in the oven. You said it like you were confessing a flaw and I should know about it before I committed to the order. Something crossed his face that was fully a smile this time, unhidden. I thought, this is a woman who will not let you be comfortable with a lie, even about bread. Zariah looked at him. It does run hot, she said. I know. It's still the best bread I've ever had. She sat back in the plastic chair and looked at this man in his gray sweatshirt in his fluorescent-lit room, and she felt something that wasn't joy, not exactly. Joy was too light a word for something that had this much weight to it, but something in the same family as joy, something that lived in the chest and changed the quality of breathing. 18 months, she said, approximately. I'll keep the sourdough. He looked at her. The bakery. Zariah, you shouldn't. There are going to be associations, people who look into your business because of our connection. It could... I've been keeping that bakery open against the odds for 6 years, she said. I'm not going to let a federal investigation change that. She paused. And Jamin, I need you to hear this. When you come out, when this is done and you're on the other side of it, you don't come back with money. You don't come back trying to fix things or solve things or protect me from the consequences of my own choices. She held his gaze. You come back and you help me make bread. You come back and you help Maya with her homework. You come back small. Understand? He looked at her for a long moment. Small, he said. Human, she corrected. That's what I mean, human-sized. He nodded, the deliberate nod. I can do that. I think you can too, she said. I think that's actually what you want. The guard came to the door and indicated the time was ending, and Zariah stood, and Jamin stood, and they looked at each other across the table in the fluorescent room with its plastic chairs and its nothing quality, and the receipt was not between them, and there was no bread and no suit and no organization, just the two of them, and the particular understanding that had been building since the second Wednesday. I'll come back, she said. I know you will, he said. She went home and made bread. The 18 months moved the way time moved when you were too busy to track it, not in chapters, but in accumulations. The federal case proceeded with the thoroughness that significant federal cases proceeded with, its progress reported in brief news items that Zariah read with the flat attention she brought to things she needed to know without letting consume her. Jamien's attorneys were indeed good. The cooperation was indeed significant. The outcome landed at 14 months rather than 18, in a minimum security facility downstate that Zariah drove to on the third Sunday of every month with Maya in the passenger seat and a brown paper package of bread in the back. The visits were an hour each time. They sat across from each other at tables in a room that was less institutional than the federal holding facility, but still not a place where anyone was comfortable. And they talked the way people talked when the conversation had to carry everything: the week, the small events, the accumulating texture of ordinary days. Maya came on 4 of the visits, and on the 4th she sat across from Jamin and talked about her geometry class for 20 minutes with the full unguarded ease of someone who had decided a person was trustworthy and wasn't inclined to reconsider. And Zariah watched Jamin listen to her daughter and felt something settle in her that had been slightly unsettled since January. The bakery survived. This was not a small thing, and she did not treat it as one. The neighborhood continued its slow transformation, 2 more longtime businesses closing on the block, the building 2 streets over completing construction and filling with residents who had the particular quality of people who had not grown up in a neighborhood like this and were making a particular kind of peace with having moved into one. Some of them became her customers. She did not feel complicated about this. Money was money, and bread was bread, and her mother had fed everyone who came through the door regardless of where they came from, and she was her mother's daughter. She applied for a grant from the city's Small Business Development Fund in the spring and received it. Not the full amount, but 60%, enough to replace the oven on the far left that had finally given up in March, and to put new glass in the display cases and to add 2 tables to the front room. She hired a part-time assistant, a 20-year-old named Deshawn from the neighborhood who had an immediate and serious relationship with bread making that reminded her of herself at that age. The particular focus of someone who had found the thing they were supposed to do. Maya turned 13 and then 14. She grew her mother's height and kept her own particular serious quality, the directness that Zariah had worked to protect since she was small. She was good at school in the focused way of someone who found it useful, rather than the performed way of someone who found it necessary. And she had her mother's instinct for looking at hard things without flinching, which was both a trait worth having and, Zariah sometimes thought, a trait that came from having lived the life she'd lived, and not from anything either of them had planned. On Sunday visits, she brought Jamin geometry homework, which had evolved by the 8-month mark into advanced algebra, and they sat with it at the table while Zariah drank bad coffee from the vending machine and watched her daughter explain the logic of equations to a man who had once managed the financial architecture of a multi-city criminal organization and who engaged with the homework with a seriousness that was, she knew, not about the math at all. She did not visit her mother every Sunday anymore. Her mother's condition had declined to the point where the visits were harder to navigate. But she went every other week, and she brought bread, and she sat with her mother in whatever quality of presence her mother could offer that day. And on the days when her mother knew her and spoke her name in the old, full voice, Zariah held those moments the way you held the things you couldn't keep. Park Sung-hoon received 11 years. She read this in a news item the same week the first autumn came without a visit to the federal facility, without the 2-hour drive and the bad coffee and the table across from Jamin, because Jamin had been released on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, and Kim had driven him. Kim, who had gotten out ahead of the dismantling with the cleanest possible record and was now apparently running a legitimate logistics company in the suburbs. And he had stood on the sidewalk outside the facility in a pair of jeans and a gray wool sweater that he had asked Zariah to bring because he hadn't wanted to come out in the clothes they'd given him, and he'd looked up at the sky the way you looked at a thing you'd been away from long enough to need to relearn the scale of it. She'd been waiting by the car. He'd walked toward her and stopped about 3 feet away and looked at her with those eyes that were the same as they'd always been. That full banked attention, except that something in them had changed. Not the intensity, the weight behind it, the weight of a man who had been carrying something enormous for so long that the loss of it had changed his center of gravity, who was still learning where his balance was without it. "You look different," she said. "Good different or bad different?" She looked at him. The 14 months, the gray at his temples that hadn't been there before. The quality of stillness that was the same but somehow less defensive now, less maintained. The jeans and the gray sweater, which fit him with none of the precision of the suits, but suited him, she thought, more accurately. Good, she said. He closed the 3 feet between them, and he held her, both arms, and she let herself be held, her face against the gray wool sweater, and she could feel his heart beating steadier than she expected. Not the racing of someone overwhelmed by the moment, but the measured beat of someone who had arrived at a place they had been moving toward for a very long time. I told you I'd come back, he said quietly. I told you I'd keep the sourdough, she said. He learned to make bread. This was not a metaphor, or not only a metaphor. It was a literal process that happened in the kitchen of Brooks and Daughters over the course of many early mornings in the months after his release. And it was harder than he expected, and he was worse at it initially than his precision-minded brain had anticipated, and this frustrated him in a way that was wholly new, because the things he had been bad at in his previous life had not involved flour on his hands, and a dough that refused to behave. Zariah had no patience for frustration in her kitchen. You're thinking too much, she told him, on a morning in November when the sourdough he'd shaped had come out wrong for the 3rd time. Stop calculating and feel it. I don't know how to do that. Yes, you do. You just haven't used it for anything that didn't matter before. She took his hands and repositioned them in the dough, and her flour-covered hands over his was such a specific and ordinary thing that it moved through him in a way he couldn't account for by any framework his previous life had given him. There, feel that? He felt it. Yes, he said. That's when it's right. She stepped back. Do it again. He did it again. And again. He came in at 5 a.m, 3 days a week for 4 months, working beside Deshawn, who treated him with the straightforward respect of someone who knew the broad outlines of his history and had decided not to make it the primary fact about him, which was a generosity Jamin noted and did not take lightly. He was not skilled at the bread for a long time. His hands were precise, but they were not yet intuitive, not yet broken in the way that bread demanded. But he kept coming. This was perhaps the most significant thing about the process, that he kept showing up at 5 a.m. to do something he was bad at in a place that belonged to someone else. And he did it without the armor of competence that had been his primary way of existing in the world for 13 years. He did it in the jeans and the work apron Zariah gave him on the 2nd week, and the flour that never fully came out of the creases of his hands. He moved into an apartment 6 blocks from the bakery, small and clean, chosen for proximity and for the fact that it had a window that looked east and caught the morning light in a way that surprised him every time. He was working with a non-profit legal organization that assisted recent immigrants in navigating the same systems he had navigated at 14 through worse means, an arrangement that had come about through Reyes, who turned out to have a broader understanding of what productive reintegration could look like than Jamin had anticipated. He sat across from people who arrived the way he had arrived, and he helped them with a specificity that no guidebook or social worker fully provided. And he did not tell them his story, but they read it in him somehow, in the way he looked at them, and he let them read it because it was true. The work paid almost nothing. He lived on almost nothing. He had, in the final accounting of the civil asset proceedings, a sum that was modest by the standards of his previous life and sufficient by the standards of his current one. He did not think about the previous sum. He thought about what he had now, which was a great deal more than he'd had on the January night he'd pressed his face against a bakery window with a fistful of coins. One afternoon in the spring of the 2nd year, a Saturday when the bakery was closed and the kitchen was theirs, he made a sourdough that was right. He knew it before it came out of the oven, knew it from the weight of it and the sound it made when he tapped the bottom, the hollow note that meant the crust had formed correctly. He pulled it out and set it on the rack and stood back. Zaria came into the kitchen and looked at it. She picked it up and tapped the bottom herself and set it down and looked at him. Finally, she said. It took long enough. Most things do. She untied her apron. Cut it. He cut it. She took a piece and stood there and ate it, and he watched her face, which was the most honest face he had ever known, which registered what it registered without calculation or performance. She chewed. She swallowed. Good, she said. He felt something that he had no clean word for. Not pride in the sense of his previous life, not the cold satisfaction of a strategy executed correctly, but something warmer and more fundamental. The feeling of having made something with his hands, and had it be received as nourishing. the feeling, perhaps, of having started over. Maya came in from the front of the bakery where she'd been doing homework, drawn by the smell. And she took a piece without asking, which she'd been doing since October, and she ate it standing by the prep table. "Better than last time," she said. "I know," he said. "Still not as good as Mom's." "I know that too." Maya looked at him with her mother's directness. This 14-year-old girl who had been in a bathtub at 4 in the morning because of the consequences of his choices, and who had said at least he didn't run with the matter-of-fact clarity of someone who had decided to move forward and was done adjudicating the past. "You'll get there," she said. She took her bread back to the front of the bakery. Zariah was looking at him. He looked back. There were things between them that had not been fully named, a relationship that had built itself in the particular way that things built themselves between people who had been through something significant together, not romantically accelerated but deeply rooted, the way trees grew near water, with a sureness that had come from pressure rather than ease. They were not moving quickly. They were not pretending certainty they didn't have. What they were doing was showing up, which Jamin had come to understand was not the lesser version of the grand gesture, but its more demanding one. The choice made not once, but every morning when the alarm went off. He had told her everything. All of it. Not in one conversation, but across many. The whole architecture of what he had built and what it had cost, and the specific people and moments and choices that he had made in the years between the bakery door and the federal facility. He had told it without softening and without self-dramatization, in the same flat factual register he used for everything that was real, and she had listened with the same attention she brought to all things. She had not absolved him. She had not told him it was okay. What she had done each time was listen until the end and then say what she actually thought, which was sometimes difficult to hear and was always true. He had come to understand that this, being told the truth by someone who had nothing to gain from telling it, was perhaps the rarest thing he had ever been given. Rarer than money or power or the particular fear-edged respect of a room full of dangerous men. Rarer than all of it. On an evening in late spring, a Tuesday, after Maya had gone to bed, and the bakery was closed and the kitchen was clean, they sat at one of the front tables the way they had sat on the first night. The October night, he'd put the receipt on the counter, and the world had tilted slightly on its axis. And the street outside was warm now, under the same orange lights, and the neighborhood was doing what it did in spring, opening up, people out later, the sound of the city carrying differently through the open windows. She put the receipt on the table between them. She had kept it all this time. In the nightstand, then in the drawer by the register, then the nightstand again, moving it with the periodic compulsion of someone who wasn't ready to put something away but hadn't decided what else to do with it. The paper was old now beyond its original aging, the creases fully soft, the ink in places almost gone. You could still read it, Jun Hei Jin, and below it, in the handwriting of a 14-year-old boy in the cold, "I will repay this, every debt I have. I promise on my life." They looked at it for a moment. "Do you think you have?" she said. "Repaid it." He looked at the receipt. He looked at her. "No," he said. "I don't think it works that way." He looked at the receipt again. "I think some debts change into something else. I think they stop being about the original thing." What did this one change into? He looked at her for a long time. "A life," he said quietly. "The one I should have been living." Zariah looked at the receipt. She folded it once, carefully, along its oldest crease. She held it for a moment. Then she set it down and left it on the table between them. Outside, the spring night ran its ordinary life along the street. A couple walking a dog, the sound of Maricela's still open, a kid on a bicycle taking the corner too fast, the specific warm smell of the city after a day of sun that was nothing like the city in winter, and was, in its own way, just as itself. Zariah looked at the street, looked at Jamin, at the flowers she could still see in the creases of his hands from the morning. "So what do we do with it?" she said. "The receipt." He thought about it. Actually thought, the way he thought about things that mattered. "Frame it," he said. She looked at him. "Put it on the wall," he said. "With the other photographs. The neighborhood." A pause. "It's part of the neighborhood. It's part of what happened here." She sat with this for a moment. Then she nodded. The small, decisive nod. "Okay," she said. She left it on the table. He left it on the table. They sat in the spring evening and let the city come in through the open window, and neither of them said anything else for a while, because there wasn't anything else that needed saying. And because the silence between people who understand each other had a quality that speech interrupted rather than improved. The receipt sat on the table between them, old and soft and fully used. A piece of paper that had been a promise, and then a wait, and then something else entirely. A door, maybe, that two people had chosen to walk through, not knowing what was on the other side, knowing only that the walking through was the thing that mattered. Outside, the city went on doing what cities did. Inside the bakery, the bread was rising. That was enough. That had always been enough.